it's hard, right, for us to kind of acknowledge what our situations are.
I thought I made it post-college, then a few months later, we see your passion's not in it.
I went in with a little bit too much cockiness, perhaps, and really didn't prepare as well as I should have. If you really want to improve, you have to be self-aware. Building that self-awareness is going to help with strengthening your performance.
You should hire based on potential. That sentiment may be misleading. Welcome to Push Yourself podcast, where we explore real stories of resilience, career growth, and personal purpose. Today, I am joined by Keith Okrosy, an associate director at a college in New York City. With over 16 years of experience helping students find meaningful careers, Keith brings a deep insight into mentorship, workforce development, and guiding people through life's career transitions. Keith, I'm excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
All right, thank you, and I appreciate the introduction. I think I'm now going to have some new language for my bio. I appreciate the
I'm glad.
text. Yeah, that sounded
Of
good.
course. So before we dive into your story, how would you explain what you do to someone outside of career counseling, especially in terms of helping students build their identity and resilience, but without using the word counseling itself?
Hmm. Oh, interesting. That's
Tough
like a little,
questions.
yes, that's an interesting um, thought experiment. Sure. So I would say that I work directly with students to help them to find what they're passionate about and to put them on the road to help them along with that pathway, from supporting them with their decision making, helping them to integrate various aspects of who they are and within themselves and within their world, and how they want to really kind of live out that passion through the work that they do. And you know, and of course that goes along with supporting them as they continue that journey with support with resume help, cover letter help, interview help. And I've also, over the course of my time, have worked directly with employers as well, which helps to shape my understanding and awareness of the fields that students could pursue and what employers are seeking. And I use that to help provide the guidance that students seek, to make sure that they are kind of straightening that path, as windy as it may feel. So hopefully that has served the task, and I did not use the word counseling, I think. So I think
I don't think you've done. I don't think
that's
you
okay.
did. So thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Maybe this would be the hardest question so far.
Well, I
Let's
don't
hope
know.
everything
Maybe
is a little easier.
it should get harder as it goes on. Right?
Yes. Well, maybe easier, but no less insightful. So you spent a lot of your career helping other people, but in today's world where people are often searching for meaning beyond just a paycheck, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing job seekers? And how do you help students align their career paths with a deep sense of purpose?
Yeah. I think for one, um, number one, I think that we shouldn't get into the grip of kind of what's happening in the world. I mean, there are certainly a lot of challenges, and it continues to feel like things are getting more and more challenging by the day. However, I feel as though if we still kind of maintain our center of concentration, right, under sort of keeping an awareness of how things are moving along, whether that is, kind of keeping up to date with what's happening within the news, within the economy, um, and recognizing that along the way as they continue in their career journeys, as they build their skills through their college experiences, that they are really focusing on how they're strengthening their competencies, how they are really developing the ability to adapt to various circumstances, and to recognize that they don't have to define themselves by one thing, such as a specific major, right? That college isn't necessarily always about just getting the the piece of paper and moving on. It's about developing strengths. It's about the ability to navigate through changing times, right? So with various changes to how the way in which work is done, such as the inclusion of AI, we're not um, frightened by it. We're thinking of how we are strategically utilizing those tools, right? And so I feel as though if students just kind of, or anybody really, kind of tries to avoid getting in the grip of the anxiety or fears that come along with any negative things that might be coming our way. Um, if they're resilient within themselves, if they also think about their own support networks and lean in on that, um, or seek those support resources and mentoring and where they can, um, I feel like that will help them not only kind of adjust to the circumstances as they are at the moment, and plan for their futures, but also to develop strengths and skills that will help them along the way as things change, as they decide they may want to transition into another field, for example, or maybe things happen in their work and people get laid off. So if they need to kind of pivot and go into another direction, that they're not in a grip, they're not in a panic. They have the capability to go through that, um, with support, and that they can keep plugging ahead. Um, yeah, I hope that's kind of gotten to the nugget of it. And I'm sure there's a lot of other ways to approach that question, but I think in the nuts and bolts of it all, um, I would say building resilience is a key thing.
Now, you mentioned support networks. I guess that would include, by extension, mentors, of course, the work that you do, and something that I have been thinking on a personal level, something that I only come to terms with recently. I'm turning 40 in a couple of months, and only recently that I realized that I'm a first generation college student. It took me quite a while. I fully didn't realize and really kind of own that identity. My parents were born in USSR post World War II. I'm the youngest of three children. They never went to college. They immigrated here, in their 40s and 50s, and I didn't have anyone to guide me through high school, through college, or even through the early career decisions. So looking back, I realized I was figuring out alone. I know my story is not necessarily unique. Of course, there are individuals in these circumstances. And now, from the if any wisdom that I have that my years experience has given me, like especially working in talent acquisition, I could see how much support I could have used and how much support other individuals in similar situations could have used. And I think about the imposter syndrome. Many students and professionals battle imposter syndrome. I know I faced it myself. So when you see someone doubting their worth who does not necessarily have that support network outside of what you would provide as a counselor, even when their potential is clear, how do you help individuals battle through that? What advice do you give them on their own journey?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's very interesting, and I appreciate you sharing your own personal story as well. And interesting that you mentioned that you're only now at this stage kind of coming to the realization that you are that is, your history. And I think that underscores that, for a lot of us, right, we're going through life. It's always hard. It's hard, right, for us to kind of acknowledge, what our situations are, right, and how that might be impacting our mental health, or how that might be impacting our thoughts of our capabilities and of ourselves as we look around to see others and what they're doing, and look back at ourselves and see, where we are in comparison to that, right? So I feel as though maybe that's one way of starting, right, is to kind of allow people to kind of draw within and to sort of say, wow, this is my story, right? It is unique, which is definitely important, and that helps enrich my life. Um, and yet at the same time, there's many others who perhaps are going through some similar feelings and thoughts as well. And there's a lot of strengths as well that I'm sure has come through that, right? And sets one apart, for a variety of reasons, whether it's, adapting to new cultures, adapting to new language, um, going through that journey, even in and of itself, can be something that helps to strengthen us in other ways that we kind of sometimes find hard to even express or even be aware of, right? So I think that maybe it is allowing us to acknowledge that there is a lot of power in that journey, um, and it's, I think sometimes in this society, only natural for us to kind of feel like we're in a race, and that we always have to out maneuver the competition. Um, doesn't always have to be the case, right? I think that if we keep it focused on, what are we trying to achieve through our work? What is it that we're what imprint are we making? What accomplishments have we been able to achieve? How have the various experiences that we've gone through sort of strengthen our resilience? And again, going back to those support networks, right? If we don't have a good strong support network, or if we don't believe we have that, maybe kind of looking at that and evaluating those relationships, and sort of seeing from that assessment, where we can go from there, right? Whether it is continuing to lean in on some of those support networks or strengthening those bonds where we can, or seeking out new, or a combination of all those sort of things, right? So for example, when it comes to first generation students, one, colleges certainly will have resources for students, and often will have cohort programs, which I think definitely have a lot of value. But even outside of that, of course, students sort of connecting with others as friends, as colleagues, I think that that's also something for us to acknowledge, that as we go through that journey, we're doing it together. And then even though our classmates may not necessarily be in the workforce now, they eventually will be, right? And I think that we should acknowledge that. Say, okay, as they continue to exceed, I'll keep connecting with them, and that might be a value at some point down the line in terms of our future. So, more so than just career, but also just kind of for our lives, and sort of enriching our experiences through connecting with others, right? So, I don't know. So I guess again, it's kind of going back to our center, acknowledging, the real potential in that, recognizing any setbacks and barriers and seeing that those are not insurmountable, developing strengths and strategies to overcome any of those challenges, to push forward. And finally, to kind of acknowledge that connecting with others and the relationships we have can really help us to kind of push those barriers down, along with us.
You mentioned the journey. I love that very thoughtful, complex explanation.
Mhm.
I think our life, finding out what we want to do, is intrinsically, there's an intersection, I think, for some of us who are maybe not motivated by monetary rewards, but we want to pursue passion. It is about finding the intrinsic meaning to the work that we do. And the greatest piece of advice that I received is that everything we learn from somebody else, whether it's people, books. And specifically for me, about 10, 15 years ago, got into various Eastern philosophies, then into Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius. And I know behind you there are a few books, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you'd also have a little of an interest in philosophy. Is there any maybe theoretical, philosophical framework that you've learned, you've uncovered, that you think would be useful for students to know in their navigation of these career journeys?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, I think that when it comes to any specific philosophy, I wouldn't want to kind of name any particular one. And I feel like, for me anyway, at least in my own experience in doing that kind of reading, having a versatility, uh, and reading a number of different types of approaches to life and to our understanding, I think that that's probably even more beneficial, and seeing where these things perhaps have some way of synthesizing, and maybe through that, I'm sure that people will find things that really speak to them, that and maybe are more resonant, and maybe that could be a way of thinking through how they're engaging with deeper reading and deeper thought.
That reminds me of a quote by Bruce Lee. It's like, absorb what is useful, basically absorb everything, but then you have to internalize it
Mhm.
and kind of subtract what is useless, what doesn't work for you, and kind of you truly make something uniquely your own at the end.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, so create our own, way of passion. It was to say that we have to find it, right? It's and that it comes through a job. It could be something that we kind of develop on our own through, the connection between the things that we do, the things we get joy out of, and the things that maybe don't give us joy, and trying as best as we can to eliminate that, or at least develop strengths to overcome certain things that come our way, right? So yeah, I don't want to put any particular perspective out there to say this is the sort of approach you should follow. Um, I think that yeah, to that point is just sort of being open to studying new ideas, and see where that incorporates into your own life.
You just reminded me of a personal story about you spoke about kind of finding new experience, but also that experience not is going to tell you headed in a positive direction, but experiences that will steer you away from something. And this reminds me of experience what I had. I personally, yes, I worked with career development, career services through college, never really done an internship, as in something that was outside of the comfort zone and into an area that I thought I wanted to pursue outside of college. Mainly it was marketing. And I'm thinking back on my first dream job that I had post graduation, my first full time salaried, what I thought would be a career in marketing. And I lasted only for 4 months in it. Kind of by the end, I knew like, wow, I'm working now. I thought I made it post college, but something wasn't right. What I thought I wanted to do, I realized isn't something that I wanted to pursue once I got there. And that's why I realize now, not having that experience during being a student in college, I never done an internship. If anybody ever asks any for advice, I'm like, hey, have you done an internship? I'm encouraging
Yeah.
people to expose themselves to different experiences and to figure things out.
Hmm.
Does this work for you? Does it not? But looking back on your career,
Hmm.
was there a pivotal moment when you faced rejection or challenge that reshaped your thinking? And how was that experience influenced, maybe by you were mentored and guided along the way?
That's a really good question, actually, and thank you for that. I mean, when I was following my degree, I worked for quite some time in a labor union here in New York City. And after quite a bit of time, I felt like I was stuck. Um, and there were a lot of applications that I was sending out. I mean, I felt like I was interested in kind of going in this direction, and like I didn't have a name for it, but I preferred kind of doing more of the guidance and support for people in the role that I had at this institution. But I did feel stuck in terms of pay and in terms of promotion. And I was applying outside of the organization in different spaces, and I didn't really have a lot of ideas as to exactly what I wanted to do. Um, and so, I had, I think, for quite some time, just kind of went about the process very independently. Um, you know, Sort of feeling like, oh yeah, I know, how to write a resume and how to write a cover letter and how to interview. Um, and I felt like, yeah, maybe generally I had quite a lot of those strengths, but I think that it came through that process of rejection, and kind of going back to the drawing board, realizing that perhaps I wasn't kind of approaching this in the right way. And then visiting the career center that I had, I was through going in my master's at the time. Um, that career center, meeting with their advisor and getting mentorship and support through that, and doing mock interviews. That was what let me landed me here. So I think that you know, uh, not to say that there's any one way that anybody approaches their career development and how they approach their jobs and internships. I feel like a lot of times we do find ourselves in a situation where we have to go it alone, and we don't have to always do that, right? But I think one lesson is, yes, lean in on your supports, whether it is the career center or mentors or people within your life that you could kind of turn to, just have these sort of conversations. Um, and there's not always one way of approaching the whole process. So, kind of going back and of reflecting, saying to yourself, something's not working here. I'm missing something. And I think that that also could be very informative for people to be thinking about, right? What is working, what isn't working, and what can you do to change that? Whether it is having a consultation, or maybe for those who are networking with a whole bunch of people, but it's still not kind of tying it all together, maybe going back and focusing in on, sort of sitting down and working through, their resume and so forth. So, um, anyhow, so that those would be two bits of advice, I think, there.
Okay. But I'm going to try maybe just to dig a little bit deeper, but is there any singular experience? And the reason I ask, the purpose while we're here to talk, I talk about how on social media we tend to portray the best version of our life. But all the while, it's imposter syndrome, mental health. We're thinking, you may think by seeing other people all these successes, well, everybody's succeeding, but why am I failing? So that's why I realized, my mission in a sense, if I'm going to share my story, the good and the bad, and especially, say like the negative things, you're going to, undoubtedly everyone's going to experience some kind of setback, and that's why I would freely share. Now it's ultimately up to you, but like, is there any particular negative experience story? Like maybe you thought you had a great interview, but still ended up rejected from a job, or just something that a mistake, something that's specific that what you would consider maybe at the moment from that particular frame of mind as a catastrophic failure. In retrospect, like for me, it was getting let go from that job. You're thinking in the moment, oh my God, I let go. My son was about a little over a year old at that moment. I thought I made it, but then a few months later, like, oh, they nicely put it, hey, we see your passion's not in it. I'm like, oh yeah, I agree in my head. I realized that. Looking back on it, I realized, oh, yeah, maybe, the job wasn't right for me, and maybe I was not right for the job. So that's the gem, the lesson that I took from that. But what about you? Do you have any particular stories?
Yeah. I mean, I think one story does come to mind as you're saying that, and this again, kind of goes back to the same time period where I had an interview, went to the second round, which was with a director of this center that I was really interested in working with, and I had a relationship with the center already. So I feel like maybe what happened was I went in with a little bit too much cockiness, perhaps, and really didn't prepare as well as I should have. And there were a lot of questions that kind of threw me entirely. So whereas, I remember the first round with the group interview being kind of very at ease and just having real comfort with having a conversation with the team. This interview that I had, yeah, I just felt like I didn't really have a full grasp as to what I was trying to deliver, or even a full grasp of the position itself. And so it you could tell, I could tell in the moment, even though I wasn't necessarily nervous, it was just those quite a few awkward silences, like, or even like, oh, I don't think I necessarily answered that the right way. And again, it goes back to, I think, checking myself and realize, oh, yeah, maybe I don't have it all ready and prepped to go. And maybe I need to take a little bit more time to kind of ready myself and lean in on support networks to kind of help me practice or sort of think through how to approach this conversation. And so, yeah, but it again just goes back to that acknowledgement, right? It's, I mean, one, it probably really wasn't the right fit. Now that I'm reflecting back on it, I think it's fine. Obviously, now that's we're past that, and I'm very comfortable where I am at the moment, um, and things worked out. But also, yeah, always good to kind of go back and say, what didn't work, right? What can I change? Because I can't control anybody else's kind of actions or decisions. I can only control my own behavior, right? So, what is it that I could have done better uh, to move forward?
I think you just said it. Like, what you could have done better. Like, what do you think about this idea, like, of feedback? And the feedback in terms of experiences that we do in generally in life, or experiences that we may do in, work, internship. As we're pursuing something, a student pursues something, they have an internship in a couple of different areas, and it's not just about having that experience, but it's about interpreting what does that experience mean for you. I mean, I can put it from one side, hey, doing this kind of work, shadowing this kind of work, a professional area A or area B, oh, I'm leading towards this area because it feels good and feels like I'm more invested in learning, versus maybe you would have a different internship in a slightly different area of a certain profession. Like, oh, this is not right for me. And I like this idea of feedback, and it outgrew from sports in a way. We both have sons. I think my
Yeah.
son is a couple of years older, but I love sports, and he does basketball now. And I'm having loved sports from an early age. I kind of, I try to pass on some pieces of information. And the way I explain things, I try to frame it, sports, this particular pursuit, as a tool. And when you're
Okay.
doing something, when you're practicing a particular facet of the game, think of it not just doing it, but getting it right by interpreting the feedback, even simply from dribbling the basketball. That process of dribbling the ball, you have to not just mindlessly hit it. It's about slowing things out in your head and interpreting the feedback that your fingers, your palm, and how does a little movement of your hand
Right.
affects the dribble, little degree here, little degree there. And for me, there's some connection with experiences we have in the pursuit, for example, of things that we want to do. What do you think of just that idea in general of interpreting feedback in life that your life experience gives you?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that analogy up too, because recently I had gotten into swimming, and there's a bit of a history to that too. partially due to some situations that happened in my own health. Um, and I had never had any kind of formal training in that, and I still haven't. Other than some YouTube videos. I guess it's just the way that I handle a lot of things. Um, but I feel like that's an interesting point you're making in terms of just sort of like a physical awareness of like where the placement of your hand, right? I mean, and I've noticed this myself, right? With swimming in particular, you really have to be very aware of all parts of your body, things that in the moment you can't even necessarily see. You have to kind of have a feeling of it. And I was certainly a mess when I first got in. But I feel like now, not that I'm, ready to jump into a race or anything. I feel like I can kind of really go into it with a bit of grace. And it took some time and it took some awareness, and pushing myself to try to carve out the time to go to the pool and actually get in there, and do it. Um, and I think that that's a great analogy, sort of thinking about that sports uh, sort of experience, right? Because if you really want to improve, you have to be sort of self-aware, right? You have to really, you can't always watch yourself, and you can't always record yourself either. And even when you are, it's kind of hard to exactly know what was going on at the moment, right? So, I think that sometimes building that sort of self-awareness is going to help with strengthening your performance. And the same thing goes with work, right? In all facets, right? Getting that critique, saying, okay, this isn't working. I'd rather have this. I think you need to kind of work on this, strengthen this. Let's come together with a plan to do this. Um, I think that definitely is of value. And I would say beyond just, waiting for your supervisor to kind of have an evaluation of you, thinking in advance of also like, oh, I wish had done that better. Oh, I don't really like this finished product. Let me have a conversation. And as opposed to just saying, oh, I don't know what to do, come in saying, this is where I am at. This is where I'm stuck. This is what I think I might need. Um, so that collaboratively, you and your supervisor or whomever else it is you're working with can kind of work together, as opposed to you just kind of coming in and saying, well, here it is. Here's my work product. And, and then getting angry when somebody says, well, I don't like what you've produced here. So I would say the evaluation isn't necessarily always, or only rather, just that moment when you're sitting down and meeting with your supervisor for a formal conversation. It's ongoing. Right? They should be giving ongoing supervisory kind of guidance and oversight as best they can. And you individually should be sort of saying, oh yeah, what's going on? What am I doing? What am I missing? What could I be doing better? What's the progress of this process? And so it's not a one-way thing. It's an ongoing collaborative process. I think that might be a better way to approach that experience of evaluation.
Good. Now, wow, you said a few things, and I don't know right now. I'm deciding which avenue, which question do I pursue. So I wanted to say, like we're talking on this topic. I reminded of a mindset. I think it was Carol Dweck wrote a book called Mindset,
Yes.
and maybe is what we're talking about is the quality, a mental quality of being receptive. I think, as you mentioned, that feedback from your managers, from your supervisors, which may at first seem kind of like an attack, because I think undoubtedly I would tend to think we are trying to do good, but we may not because we don't want to, but because we're lacking a certain piece of knowledge that hopefully a leader can instill to you. So not having that closed off mindset of saying, oh, I know everything. It's about, oh, I may think I know everything, but I have to be open to learning things from others. And that's a very delicate situation. I found in myself, okay, we have professional goals, you have professional goals, but we all have managers, supervisors, people who we are responsible for reporting about our work. And through the process, professional journey, we have to try to pursue our personal passions if we have any, and also at the same time hit company goals. You can't forget about it. No matter how grandiose and positive your personal goals may be, if they're not in line with what your employer requires you, you are going to get fired, no matter how great of the work you do if it doesn't serve the need of the organization. But this is where I want to take this line of thinking. You, as a leader, undoubtedly, you supervised employees, maybe college students. What lessons have you to share regarding leadership and success of leadership at the same time? There's that idea leaders should not be afraid to train up individuals working with them, for them. They may, in a number of years, go on to leave the company, but it's not because they didn't do well. It's because they did so much. They did so well, they outgrew the position. They're pursuing bigger and better things. So what do you think of that in terms of leadership for yourself?
Well, that's a great point. I mean, I think a couple of things. It's a great question. Um, One, you're not going to prevent people from moving onwards, right? And I feel as though if the modus operandi is to try to do that, I think that that's when you get into situations where people get bitter, right? Um, and so I think kind of going back onto this idea of growth mindset, a manager, I think, sort of should be attuned to and be aware of what's going on for so just as much as a supervisee would should be aware of and mindful of what the supervisor is going through and what they're thinking about and why they're making decisions as they are and with the assumption that they are doing so with the with the best intentions in mind for themselves and the organization that they're working with. Supervisors should be thinking the same way, right? Assuming they also have the kind of best intentions and goodwill in mind as well. They're uh, people that they supervise. Acknowledge, yes, people have the interest in moving on, right? Moving upwards, either whether that is earning more income, or if it is having more autonomy with the work that they do. And so, not to say that, of course, where appropriate, you shouldn't try to limit that, right? People don't necessarily overstep their bounds, without, kind of uh, appropriately consulting with the supervisor to acknowledge that people want to grow, right? And allow them to do that because what ends up happening, right, is that we spend a lot of extra mental energy ourselves thinking through, oh, well, I can't grow here. I'm going to move on. I'm getting sour. I'm upset that this is even happening. And then you get a lot of foolishness that starts to happen from that, whether it's poor behavior or insubordination, who the hell knows. So I think that if you foster that growth, people will respect that, right? And appreciate that, I think. Not always, depending on the personality, I suppose, but much of the time, I think that that would be the case. And so rather than spending a lot of effort trying to tamp down creativity and autonomy, let's foster that and see how that can be directed in ways that can still help for the growth of their projects, of the organization, um, and so forth. And if they at some point decide to move on after a few years, okay, uh, a supervisor or manager who is resolved in who they are and their potential to onboard and train new people uh, should be okay with that, right?
I agree. My brother-in-law, who was a recent guest here, we talked a little bit about parenthood, and he said something about parenthood being that if you do your job right, as a parent, everything that you work for, your progeny, will ultimately end up leaving you if you do your job right. So to me,
Yeah.
this is kind of in a way directly connected. A leader, while not a father or mother, but it is in a way, in lack of a better term, a parental figure, which is as a leader, as a manager, you have to nurture individuals that work for you, in a sense, to meet a certain goal. And as a parent, your goal is to provide a lot of resources you can to set up your child for independence so they can do their quote unquote job right. And ultimately, they will leave you as well. But again, as a leader, it's natural for your employees to outgrow you. And as a parent, you did your job right if your child outgrows their need for you and they become independent. So I want to kind of segue with this idea. How has parenthood shaped you? To me, parenthood really kind of was a really great catalyst for growth, among many other things. It's in a way I can say I grew with my child, having seeing how to not having that support system myself. I can say in certain respects because of my parental background and the culture. I grew with my child, but I also it gave me an insight to certain things, how I view the world, how I view the pursuit of meaning of life, me on an individual level. I'm wondering what has been that learning experience for you as a father, and has it intersected with what you do professionally?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's kind of hard to give a good solid answer just because it is the sort of thing that is so multifaceted, and it's hard to know exactly, how all of these things intersect. I mean, from even just the fact that, you now have this child in your life, there's so many other things that they do, and that also shapes all other activities that you engage in. And that certainly has been the case for me and my family. So, I feel like though, with regards to kind of your point, right, in terms of kind of thinking about how one is providing that guidance and maybe even getting used to the pushback, which it's sometimes I really do appreciate. I think with my son, he's got a very um, headstrong personality style, which I honestly value. I think that that's a really good thing, and I foster that. So, uh, or I'm the victim of it. I don't know how to phrase it, but in any event, I think that that has certainly shaped just my own approach to how I kind of observe, how I uh, guide, and all of these things. And I think there's always something new to learn. How that kind of intersects with the work that I do work-wise, or well, the work that I do rather. Um, yeah, I suppose it's a bit difficult to say. I think that if anything, maybe it's something that perhaps is one of those sort of hard to pinpoint kind of factors, right? But I think it probably has strengthened my communication skills and has strengthened my resolve and comfort level of kind of being straightforward with people and giving guidance, as opposed to just kind of like not saying something when you see something going wrong, for example. So I feel that, yeah, I think that in some ways, perhaps this is a little bit uh, abstract, but yes, I feel like that certainly has helped me to be able to be upfront and communicate my thoughts and concerns.
I'm sure it given a lot of insight, but they may be hard to pin down. Maybe a specific example I'll share just in my own. So the biggest influence, like experience or something that I learned from my son growing up, it's before about 5-7 years ago. I did a little youth basketball coaching, kind of a kids from like range of 6 to 12. And at that time, my son was about like 5 years old, and the few years that I spent coaching youth basketball with a group that was older than my son, I didn't quite understand. Like I remember thinking, I love basketball. I played it in youth myself. I had the opportunity to coach. Now I'm imparting these ideas, these drills, but in my head I'm thinking, oh, why aren't kids grasping it? But
Hmm.
what I realized, looking back on it, having left that and having my son grew to that through that age group of the kids that I work with, something told me, oh, I now realize how his mind operates at that age, and that's what I was lacking, the understanding of how to impart that knowledge properly to children of a particular age group. Kind of like what I've learned later on is that idea you should interact with children, with kids, just above their level of understanding in order to pull them up to your level, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I was like way above. I had such high expectations that I was the problem. Like
Hmm.
now I'm like, okay, it passed. That was a very great learning experience. But oh, that's an insight I can apply to other areas, and I'm sure you can apply. Maybe do you apply something similar working with college age students who lack that experience, and you have to bridge that gap of your level of understanding of workforce employment?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. I think that's really interesting, acknowledging that it was our fault altogether, which I think as parents is probably the only lesson that we never learned. Yes, I think so. Yes, I think that, in a lot of ways, sometimes I think of either myself or others that I've known that, have gone through various trials and travails themselves to kind of help support and guide students. We learn from each other. And I think that hearing others' stories helps us to understand, how people have gone through these different moments in their own lives to help us figure out ways that we could avoid some of those pitfalls, or and sometimes we avoid one booby trap, and then we step foot in the other direction and something else gets us. So there
Right,
you go.
exactly.
But in any event, no, I think that for sure insight has come through just that process of learning myself and things that I've lived through, and others have lived through, and not that I necessarily feel the need to impart wisdom and say, oh well, someone else had gone through this, and so you should try to avoid it. But it does shape either the questions, or sort of the ways in which we have engaged in the conversations to sort of posit other ways of thinking through challenges, or allowing students to kind of reflect upon what they're going through, and what they're thinking about it, and how that's shaping what their beliefs are about that and their ability to move forward. Right.
To connect to what you just said, I feel like as a parent and maybe as a counselor, a role, if there's an intersection of those two roles, it's about guiding towards experience. It's about being mindful as a parent of your child. We're not guiding them towards a specific end, but towards experiences that will help decide certain things. And I would assume, not having counseling experience direct like yourself, I'm thinking, oh, as a counselor, you're not supposed to make a decision for students, but having heard the ideas that this individual is verbalizing to you, your experience, if any wisdom, should help them guide towards experiences that will help them decide their own career path.
Yes. So I think that anyone in the helping professions, this first key skill that they should develop is listening, right? That's really 95% and plus of the work. Um, Listening, reflecting back, allowing them to do the work, right? There's nothing at all about anything that I believe they should be doing that should necessarily surface in there, right? It certainly, there's a certain point in time when you have to kind of redirect and say, okay, here's some resources you should be exploring. Here's some specific things maybe you should be doing to help you to develop your awareness, or your strengthen your goals. Let's create these goals together, and you name those barriers that you're going through. So I wouldn't necessarily say that um, the wisdom is sort of imparted. It's maybe informed by, but I wouldn't necessarily want to impose any of my values on anybody else. So it's a process of allowing them to come to those conclusions that I think is most important, rather than kind of saying, hey, did you know that so and so went through the same thing, and you should try to avoid that, right? So
I remember this was something we spoke about many, many years ago, and I came to one of the counseling sessions in my journey, and this was pretty much what you told me about guiding. I do want to ask this question from your perspective. I often see posts, for example, LinkedIn, sharing the sentiment companies should hire employees based on potential. Now, I've applied
yes.
to hundreds of jobs before I worked in talent acquisition, and having the perspective of talent acquisition, I realized, seeing that the process firsthand, it's like, oh, it's not that simple. It's not about potential, maybe in certain areas, but on the whole, I realized that sentiment may be misleading. So how do you, having that in mind, if you have thought about it, how do you position individuals to get beyond that potential and towards being hireable?
Well, yeah, that's right. Because you know what, it goes back, I think, to kind of what we were talking about earlier, with regards to the relationship between supervisor and supervisee, right? We're all, companies, they have their own demands, they have their own needs, right? And so sort of, I think that a word like potential allows students to kind of break their sort of mindset of, oh, well, I need to do this, or I need to have this on my resume, right? And if I don't have it, then I'm at a loss. But at the same time, if you acknowledge, something, this employer needs something, right? And I'm sure in your role in talent acquisition, with, the large number of applicants that you received, and the number of huge amount of resumes you've seen, a lot of people do it the wrong way. A lot of people are sending out the exact same thing to every person, to every institution. They're sending out the same cover letter. They haven't changed it. It still has got the ridiculous typos, and they're using ridiculous templates that, make their name like take up about a quarter of the page. and with multiple columns and think that's okay, right? So there's a bit of a balance, right? You have to say to yourself, you know what? Okay, let me keep the focus of what this employer needs first. Let me emphasize why I'm the right fit for this role and what I'd be doing, and frame my communication around that. And that, I would say, well, it's not always guaranteed, should get you a little bit closer, because you're again kind of going in with the mindset that they have their own needs, right? Or they're selfish themselves, right? That they're thinking of, I need to hire somebody who's going to be able to do this job that I can train well, that I'm not going to have to really worry about too much, and that's going to allow our team to succeed. If you're not thinking about it like that, that's when your resume will go nowhere, right? Whereas if you're framing everything you've done, whether it's the accomplishments you've earned and the cover letter that really says, yes, I understand this is what your aim is for this organization, this role, this is what I've been able to do, and this is why I'm really excited about this position, I think that has a different message that's much more focused on them, right? When we're talking about communications and marketing, right, it's all about what resonates with others, right? You write to the reader. Same thing with this process, but most people, they're out of work and they need a job, and it's hard to do that. It takes time, and not everybody has a lot of time. They have a lot of other things to do, right? So pace it out, be strategic, and write to your reader.
Keith, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your story. I know our listeners will really appreciate your insight and honesty. Before we wrap up, where can people find you if they want to connect, follow your work, or continue this conversation?
Well, very good. I'm on LinkedIn, so you're welcome to reach out. When people connect, by the way, because I don't accept all, because, LinkedIn, just like a lot of things, has quite a few, oh, I saw your thing, and here's an interesting resource, or you'd be a great fit for this, and send me this. So, say, oh, I've heard this podcast, and so it would be great to connect and learn more. That I think is fine. But in any event, yes, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Folks, please definitely follow those directions. I'll make sure that your LinkedIn profile is in the show notes so people can easily find you and put in that specific message. For everyone listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing this episode with someone who might benefit from listening to it. Thanks again, Keith, and to all of our listeners. Until next time, continue to push yourself.
Hey, thank you.